Hey scholars, Miss Dodd here. Today we have Domain 10, Lesson 8, A Young Nation is Born. Really quickly, before we get started, I have a couple of shout outs to give. I have another shout out again for Rich Love in the Toledo classroom. She has been texting me. She told me that she heard Betsy Ross on Jeopardy, and then she said that when she was watching Spider-Man, she heard all about George Washington. I need to give a shout out to William in the Dayton classroom. William called me. He had a few questions and I was able to answer them. So way to go, taking a role in your education, William. Nice job. Also, I need to give a shout out to Anaya M, also in the Dayton classroom. She has been commenting on my videos, and that just lets me know that she has been watching. So, way to go, you three scholars. Nice job. All right now it's time to get started with our vocabulary. First word today is the word capital. This is going to be different than the capital we usually talk about. When we are talking about capital, usually we're talking about a capital letter. So capital letter versus a lowercase letter, big letter versus a small. Today, though, for capital, we are talking about a city that is in the center of government for a state or a country. We are really lucky because we live in Columbus, and Columbus is the capital of our state of Ohio. So Columbus is the center of government for a state. So Columbus is where all of our representatives for Ohio are. So our governor is here in Columbus, and we have a state house in Columbus. So that is the capital. Next, we have the word permanent. Permanent means lasting forever, not expected to change. One way that we'll talk about permanent, usually in the classroom, is we might be talking about a permanent marker. So if you write something with a permanent marker, you can expect that it's going to stay there for a very, very long time. It's not washable. So permanent means that it is not likely to change. If I get a haircut and I cut my hair to here, that is not a permanent change because my hair can keep growing. It will keep growing. So that's not permanent. Permanent means something that will not change. Next word, we have the word president. And the president is the person who is in charge of a country or an organization. So our president is Donald Trump. The president before him was Barack Obama. So they are the people who are in charge of our country. But you can also have another type of president. So if you have a club, you could have somebody who is the president of your club. So that's the person who's the leader of the club. And then we have the word united. And united means combined into one. We have the United States of America. So that's 50 states that are combined into one country, united. Okay? And now we are getting ready to get started. All righty, scholars, for our read aloud, we're going to be hearing all about George Washington, and we're going to find out exactly what a young nation is and how it was born. So let's get started. All righty. For the first few years after the Revolutionary War ended, the former British colonies could not seem to agree on anything. So we had those 13 colonies, and we say former British colonies because after the Revolutionary War, we were no longer part of Britain. So former means the past. But those 13 colonies could not agree on anything. They had not yet come up with a name for themselves. Some said that they should be called the Union of States. Others liked the sound of the American nation. Others simply wanted to call themselves by the names of the states in which they lived. So, for example, Virginians, if they lived in Virginia, New Yorkers, if they lived in New York, and so on. There was no plan for how they would be governed or ruled, so lots of different people were making up lots of different rules. States were taxing one another unfairly, just like the British had done before the war. What a big mess. Imagine that. Think about what would happen if all these colonies, 13 of them, had so many different laws, so many different rules. So if you were traveling from one colony into another, and in your colony you had a specific rule, but in this other colony they didn't have that rule, it would be very confusing for you. And it would be even more confusing if you went to a colony that had a rule that your colony didn't have. So you would be breaking a rule and you wouldn't even know about it. Just think about that and how confusing that would be. And then they're taxing each other unfairly. That was the whole entire reason that we had the Revolutionary War. Remember when we had the Boston Tea Party because they taxed us on the tea? We said that that was not fair because we didn't have representation. And now we're doing it to each other. Oh my goodness. But let's see a picture really quickly. So right here we can see just an example of some colonists in the 13 colonies. And it looks like they're arguing. And again, this is just an illustration. This is not a photograph. But they're arguing, and the reason they're arguing is because they can't decide on a name for the country. They can't decide on rules. And they obviously are having this major problem with taxing. So let's see what happens. Okay. George Washington was enjoying life at Mount Vernon. So remember, he went there after the Revolutionary War. And we heard in our story on Friday that he didn't have a very peaceful time after the war. And we were going to find out why. And I think that we're getting ready to find that out today. So he was at Mount Vernon enjoying life with his wife, their children, and their grandchildren. At 55, he felt that he had served his country well as the commander-in-chief, and he was not looking for any more jobs away from his farm. But 4 years after returning home from the Revolution, Washington was called to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for another big meeting. So let's take a look in our flip chart for the illustration that goes with this section of the story. So right here, this is George Washington at Mount Vernon, and he's just enjoying his life with his family, just relaxing, but now he was called in for that big meeting in Philadelphia. Okay? He joined many of the same men that he had worked in the Continental Congress with at the beginning of the war. These men are called our founding fathers, or simply founders, because they helped found or start our new country. Benjamin Franklin, now 81 years old, was the oldest representative there. So again, a founder is somebody who starts something. Mrs. Spahn and Mrs. King are considered founding teachers of UPrep because they were the first 2 teachers who were there when our school was first started. But let's take a look at those 3 founding fathers. Okay, so we have, well, just a moment, we will. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. Okay, George Washington, right here, George Washington, was elected president of the convention, or the meeting. It was called the Constitutional Convention because the men were writing a constitution, which is a plan for how the new nation could live peacefully together. So think about when we make classroom rules, and our rules are for everyone in that class and to create a peaceful environment. That's sort of what this Constitution was. It was a set of rules for everyone in all of the 13 colonies. All right, so now we're at the Constitutional Convention. "Stop arguing," George Washington told the men. "We have an important job to do." It was hard work. They met for 4 long, hot summer months from May to September. The men continued to argue. Some even walked out, but most of them stayed until they had come up with a good plan, or constitution. Their hard work paid off. The rules they wrote that summer, more than 200 years ago, are the ones that we still use today. And when our founding fathers left Pennsylvania, and specifically Philadelphia, that September, our country had a new name. So let's quickly take a look at Constitutional Convention. So right here, look, all of these men were at the Constitutional Convention. And they're all trying to make a decision about the rules for the country. Okay, so now we have a new name. "We, the people of the United States," they wrote. Remember, united means combined into one. So now all the states have come together into a united or a single nation. From then on, the 13 former British colonies were called the United States of America. And that is the name of our country today. This is all the United States of America. Okay? We are missing Alaska and Hawaii because at that time we had not acquired those 2 pieces of land yet. Alrighty, let's keep going. One thing the representatives discussed that summer was their need for a leader. They decided that a president chosen by the people to serve for only a few years would be better than a king who was not elected and who served his entire lifetime. And guess who they wanted to lead them? One of the reasons they wanted a president who could only be president for 4 years was in case something went wrong, in case he turned out not to be a good president, then in 4 years he would be gone. But if he were a king and he wasn't a very good king and he didn't take care of our country, we would have to wait for his whole entire life to be over until a new king then could become king. Remember, we've talked about ancient cultures and we talked about royalty and we talked about kings and how things were passed on. Remember when we were talking about Hatshepsut and we said that she wanted to be the pharaoh, but because she was a woman, they said she couldn't be, and they wanted to pass that down to her cousin who was younger than her. So think about that. Okay. You guessed it though, George Washington. That is who they wanted to be their leader. Here is a portrait of him, so a painting. Right here, George Washington. Once again, he had wanted to settle down in Mount Vernon, but once again, he had been called to serve his country. In 1789, when George Washington left his home in Virginia to become the first president of the United States of America, he had no idea what he was going to do. As the president of the new country, he knew that his presidency would set an example for all future presidents because he's the very first one. While president, Washington stayed very busy. He helped organize a permanent national army and navy and set up a national banking system. Remember, if something is permanent, it means that it is lasting. It does not go away. And today our country still has a permanent national army and navy. As president, George Washington lived first in New York City and then later in Philadelphia. He worked hard on plans for a city that would be our nation's capital, so the city that's in the center of government. George Washington personally chose the Capitol site along the Potomac River on land that is between Maryland and Virginia. And we're going to take a quick look at this. Okay. The capital city would not be in any state, so no state could say that it was in charge of our country. The capital city was designed to have a house in which the president and his family could live. It would also have many government buildings. George Washington was no longer president when the capital city was finally built, but the city was named in his honor, so it was named after him. And it is called Washington, D.C., and D.C. stands for District of Columbia. This is a picture of Washington, D.C. Now, each state has its own capital that's inside the state, but the District of Columbia, so Washington, D.C., is not in one specific state. So several states share it. So it's on the bank of the Potomac River, and it's on land that is in between Maryland and Virginia. So there's no state that can say the capital belongs to us. Okay, so the capital is for all of the states. After serving as president of the United States for 8 years, George Washington packed up and he headed home to Virginia. 8 years is the longest that you can be a president. You have something called a term, and a term is 4 years. So if you are first elected president, you will be president for 4 years. And then we'll have another election, and we'll vote again to see if we want you to stay president or if we would like somebody else to be the president. And after your second term, which would be another 4 years, then you cannot be president again. So you can only have 8 years as president, okay? So he had 8 years as president, and he packed up, and then he headed home to Virginia. He died at Mount Vernon at the end of 1799, which was about 2.5 years later. A patriot, a founder of our nation, a military commander, and our first president. Washington has rightly been called the father of our country. Many places have been named after him. Monuments and statues have been built in his honor. And you can even find his picture on our money, both on a paper bill and a coin. And we're going to take a quick look at that. So, his picture is on the dollar bill, and that's the paper money, and then the coin, which is the quarter, has his picture. Okay, we're going to quickly now go through some comprehension questions. Remember, these are just questions that you need to think about at the end of a story to see if you've understood it. They're not questions that go with your daily packet pages, okay? All right, question 1. What did George Washington do after the war ended? 2. If Washington loved Mount Vernon so much, why do you think that he left again? First going to Philadelphia for another meeting and then becoming president of the country. Question 2. Why do you think Washington felt it was important to have a permanent or a lasting army and navy? Question 4. The author of the Read Aloud said that George Washington is called the father of our country. What reasons did the author give for calling George Washington the father of our country? Question 5. If you had a chance to meet George Washington, what would you say to him or what would you ask him? Let me quickly grab our page for our Read Aloud. Just a moment, scholars. Just a moment. I am so sorry. I thought I had all of my pages ready. Oh my goodness. Now I have a cough, but I did not. I was not prepared. All right. For your story today, I would like for you, and you may need to rewatch this video a few times, to fill out this fact sheet all about George Washington. So do his picture right here again. That's what he looks like. And then I need you to write facts about him. So real, actual things you heard in the story, okay? So each box needs to have a separate fact. So you need 6 facts about George Washington and then his picture. All right, don't forget to do the shout out challenge. Call me, text me. Let me know that you're watching the videos. Tell me something that you have learned. I've given 3 shout outs today. Again, Rich Love William and Anaya M. And if you would like a shout out in a video, reach out to me. Bye, scholars.